Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker. On this episode of Law Weekly, we look at the trending issues of fuel scarcity in Nigeria and why it's a perennial problem in recent times. My guest is Mr. Joseph Obari, a legal practitioner with Alter Advocates and former spokesperson of one of the major oil companies in Nigeria. Also this week, we have a report on the rise in violence ahead of the elections and what the manifesto of the presidential and gubernatorial candidates should entail. We hear from a senior advocate of Nigeria, Lisa Agbakuwa, plus our top stories from the courtrooms. Let's begin. Elections are often seen as the cornerstone of a sustainable democratic state, especially when they are inclusive, free, fair, and transparent. According to one study looking at the trends of violence across different phases of the 2019 general elections, the pre-election period was generally more violent and deadly. In 2019, it shows that 9.8% of the total incidents of electoral violence and 8.2% of the fatalities were in the inter-election period. State elections were also more violent and deadly than the federal elections. It also shows that the most violence was concentrated in the South-South, 9 most violent states as listed here, and on the other hand, these states suffered the highest record of fatalities. However, as at today, there are still security concerns ahead of the 2023 elections.
With less than 100 days to the presidential election, the recent upsurge in the attack on INEC officers has been a source of growing concern in the mind of many Nigerians. Deployed by unknown men to wreak havoc by the destruction of the voter's card seems to have been more prominent in days leading up to the election. Within the space of 1 month, over 65,000 uncollected PVCs were destroyed by hoodlums who attacked 2 of INEC's offices in Ogun and Osun states, while several PVCs and other electoral items were also burnt during an attack in Ebonyi state. There have been concerns on how much longer INEC can take the incessant jabs from these unruly people, as well as how secure the 2023 general elections would be.
We are simply waiting for the next attack, and such is not acceptable in a country where there is government in place. Once criminal elements take over the monopoly of violence in any country, it simply suggests that the government has collapsed. And that is why this must be the last burning, of the offices of INEC. Issue now, we must go back to the drawing table. The INEC, in collaboration with the security forces, should prevent further attacks on the offices of INEC. I understand from security reports that criminals have taken control in about 660 local governments in Nigeria, where you cannot talk of elections. There are local governments in Nigeria today where farmers have to pay levies imposed on them by terrorists. You can't talk of elections in those places. So the members of the political class and the government will have to sit down instead of jumping all over the place. Can we really hold elections under an atmosphere of violence and lawlessness as we are currently witnessing? Because if this trend continues, the election will be, the credibility of the election will be questioned, because there will be candidates who will say, I will have won in the places where you didn't hold election. And that would be problematic.
In response to the increasing fear in the heart of many, INEC, headed by the chairman, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, has given his assurance of safety and recovery from the attacks. He also added what must be done to forestall a reoccurrence of these attacks.
We want to assure Nigerians for the materials lost, we will recover. But there is a limit as to how much we can recover if these attacks continue. So the Commission is going to work with the security agencies, with community and traditional rulers to ensure that the attacks on the Commission's facilities responded to. The best solution for us is arrest and prosecution of perpetrators. But for what happened, the Commission is confident that we will recover. But as I said, there is a limit as to how much we can recover if the attacks continue with 86 days to the general election. The Commission has said so consistently, and we are committed to ensuring that nothing will stop the election from going ahead as scheduled, and that the will of the Nigerian people will prevail.
Serving as a very important machinery in averting the menace of rigging, violence, fraud, and several other forms of illegal interference with the electoral process is the judiciary. The judiciary, as the interpreters of the law, are saddled with the cumbersome responsibility of doing justice to election petition matters.
Where, for instance, judges are under attack or judicial independence is threatened or the independence of lawyers is threatened, IBA will send rapid response missions. I think that's what you were referring to the country concerned. IBA will also comment on the conduct of the elections. If the elections are conducted outside the framework of the law of the country where the elections are taking place, the Human Rights Institute will comment on that, will make relevant observations. IBA runs a program which we call Eyewitness. Eyewitness to Atrocities is a program that enables you to take pictures and videos of events that are taking place anywhere in the world. And even if your camera were to be confiscated by the authorities in your country, the moment you have clicked the button, the picture is already stored way away from your office somewhere in London, and we collect those pictures, and the International Criminal Court has ruled that that evidence can be used in criminal proceedings before the International Criminal Court because it is reliable, it is time-specific, there is no room for editing, there is no room for corruption of the evidence. Presently, IBA has taken 25,000 pictures and videos in Ukraine in connection with possible crimes against humanity.
Stemming from how important the role of the judiciary is in the 2023 general election, the International Bar Association pledges to be on their toes in ensuring that menace of rigging, violence, fraud, and several other forms of illegal interference with the electoral process is averted. The judiciary in the 2023 general election would serve as the unbiased umpire in deciding election petition cases, upholding the decision of the electorate, as it should be, and meting out punishments to offenders of the law.
Welcome back. And staying with the forthcoming elections, we need a president who can separate their persona away from the office and be able to achieve a manifesto in order to eliminate the multidimensional poverty index of 133 million Nigerians by the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, NBS. Well, that's coming from Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Olisa Agbakuba, in what he calls his Policy Report 2022, the big issues for the 2023 general elections. Here's more.
My own position about a Nigerian president is that he is the guy that, if he understands the power of his job, can get things done. In spite of what you think may be difficulties, he can get it done. I would like to say I was a great NBA president for one reason. I understood compromise and inclusion. I understood it. Compromise and inclusion, these are the two vital elements. So what I think has gone wrong with restructuring is not the idea, is the way the argument played out that created divisions. That person who wants to be leader must understand that to be leader is to carry a cross. It's not a tea party. It's not a tea party. It's not going to be president of Nigeria and think it will be easy. You're going to take tough decisions. The Nigerian president is far too strong. It's far too strong. So there's a need for the Nigerian president in reorganizing the constitution to play a role in limiting his own powers. It will be to your eternal glory if you go in with a robust manifesto that is able to achieve the sorts of things you say in your manifesto and every other good point, one of which will be that you are a president with limited powers, not a president that can do anything, because a president can do anything is not an elected president. He becomes a demagogue, a monarch. So it's time we had a democratically elected president. I would have thought that an area the candidates would have paid great attention is revenue generation. Anyone aspiring to be Nigerian president, in spite of our, historical examples, will aspire to be president for the peace, order, and good government of Nigeria. I'll have to make that assumption. Some people suggest that opening up this question whether Nigeria really has a legitimate constitution is important. And I think it's important. A lot of people, before, years ago, I didn't think it was important, but I think Tunji Abayomi was the one who made me realize, no, it's important too. The person who gives you the constitution is a soldier. And he has said in his constitution, we the people. That's what it says. And that's an absolute lie, because we never said anything about the constitution. So a candidate who wants to come into office might take another look at this constitution so that we can reenact it under our We the People declaration. I don't think that will make him lose votes. I don't think so.
Apart from being a lawyer, our next guest has over 15 years in the oil and gas industry. Mr. Joseph Obari, legal practitioner, thank you for speaking to us at this time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I'd like to begin with the energy crisis weighing heavily around the world, particularly in Europe, and then we hear of the geopolitical realignment that we are seeing because of energy supplies in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine. Do you think that this is impacting on this part of the world?
Yeah, okay, before we go into that, it's good to give a background to what's happening. First thing was that the world economies were only just waking up from the effects of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the restrictions that followed it. And economies were only trying to catch up when the war broke out. And the result was that these economies that were not already struggling, that over time there had been very less investment in the oil and gas industry, woke up to find that a huge chunk of the supply which comes from Russia is now threatened because the war that Russia launched against Ukraine was replied by the Western world, the Western powers, who felt that they should punish Russia by banning the importation of oil from Russia, which is a major source of revenue to the country. But in doing so, that automatically created a spike in prices of oil around the world. Now, there is a direct link between what's going on in Europe, Northern Europe, and the rest of the whole of Europe, and what is happening here. The countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and all the rest of the whole of Europe virtually depend on Russia for cheaper oil, for easier access to gas and all energy and all that. But now you find that very supplier in the field of the world sanctions and the restrictions from the West, US in particular, and the rest of Europe, who didn't support what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Now, with that impact, some of the suppliers of crude oil, of refined products to Nigeria were also impacted. Nigeria imports heavily from countries like the Netherlands, like Belgium, like India, and so on. These countries, having been impacted, also have to hold back whatever they had as a reserve and say, oh, how can we now re-strategize and ensure that we are not selling ourselves out by simply supplying demands that are coming from elsewhere. So it's the entire reconfiguration of the energy supply in the whole of Europe. And now this, of course, has affected prices. Now it means that Nigeria will be buying refined products even at a higher price. And this is a country that is struggling economically. We don't have the money. We were not even able to utilize our capacity when the oil price rose to as high as $110 per barrel. So all of a sudden, you don't have the reserves to even put into importation of refined products. Now you have that challenge, and it's impacting on the economy heavily back at home.
Yes, and knowing also that, the war still continues, could that in any way, is that the reason why we are seeing the perennial fuel scarcity in, major cities, Lagos, the Federal Capital Territory in any way?
The authorities have tried to give us the impression that it is not, but it is difficult to accept that it is not so. Because if anything shows that it's a global village, it's this war that Russia launched against Ukraine. That once a country sneezes, all others can catch cold. And so it's difficult to convince us that there is no impact in any sort as a result of all what is happening in the global oil market. But be that as it may, the challenges we face at home in terms of supply of refined products are multifaceted. You're talking about cost of importation, you're talking about subsidy, you're talking about even the distribution network and national reserve, strategic reserve for supply when there are hitches and so on. So it is very opaque. The supply system in Nigeria is opaque. It's difficult to say exactly what it is because the authorities are not coming out upfront to tell us exactly what they're experiencing. There are stories of tankers lying on the high seas that are not being cleared because of payment issues. Nobody is able to tell us exactly if that is true or not and how that is impacting on the supply chain in the country.
The most recent we've also heard was the construction at the Apapa axis affecting Lagos supply, which is ricocheting to Abuja supply as well. But I'm thinking with all of this, where do you see perhaps the government coming in? A lot of people thought that the PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, that would solve all of these problems.
Yeah, but then you're talking about things like circulation of refined products to touch the life of individual Nigeria and awaken the economy. Now, as it stands, our refineries are virtually dead. They are not producing the 4 refineries with capacity of about 450,000 barrels of crude oil processing per day. They are not operating. Thank goodness the government has invested in rehabilitating these refineries. $1.5 billion for the rehabilitation of Port Harcourt refinery, and then another $1.4 billion for the rehabilitation of Warri and Kaduna refinery. Part of this intention is to be able to ease off on the pressure that is on the distribution of refined products in the country. But there are deeper things. If you issue licenses to people, I understand there are over 40 licenses issued to individuals to start refineries, conventional and modular and all that. But it doesn't translate into visible impact if people are unable to go ahead to build the refinery. Thank goodness Dangote is able to start one, and it's hopeful that it will come on board and help to ease the pressure on the system. Those are the salient issues that need to be addressed. And the act itself, intention is beautiful, but beyond that, how does it impact on people? You're talking about cost of installation of a refinery, building a refinery. It is not cheap. It is not cheap at all.
I have one final question for you, if you can answer in a sentence. And this is, I mean, Channels Television did a piece on, investigative piece on crude oil theft, finding out that we've been losing billions of money with that. You have experience working for a major oil company, and so I'm sure you're not new. It's not the first time you're hearing about crude oil theft. Do you think that, were you surprised by the amount or the sophistication of this theft ongoing in Nigeria?
My answer is a yes and no, really. Yes and no in the sense that as a person in the industry, I knew that a lot was going on that was very bad and was not in the interest of the country. My organization where I work, we practically were crying blood, asking the government for support, for assistance, and all that to be able to stem this menace. But it was seen as a problem of the IOC. And that's the problem, that's a challenge in Nigeria. It was seen as a challenge of the IOCs and not that of the country. Until it got to a point where 80% of production could not be met at the highest selling price of crude oil in recent times. So the country, it was being denied revenue because some individuals have created an industry for themselves.
And to our top trending stories from the courtroom.
We begin with the report that the Inspector General of Police, Usman Alkali Baba, has approached the court to file a motion to set aside the contempt proceeding and committal order issued against him. In a motion filed on Thursday, 1st December 2022, the IGP extensively highlighted grounds why the orders should be set aside, including noting that he had not been appointed into office as Inspector General of Police when the case was instituted and the reinstatement order in question granted. The Force Public Relations Officer, Mr. Olumiwa Dejobi, disclosed this in a statement he issued on Friday. He says the IGP has also affirmed that the contempt proceedings were served via substituted means in November 2018 and January 2019 respectively, on the then Inspector General of Police and not on him as the incumbent. A Special Offences and Domestic Violence Court sitting in Lagos has remanded the Managing Director of Optimal Cancer Care Foundation, Dr. Femi Olaleye, in Ikoyi prison pending the fulfillment of his bail conditions. The 57-year-old doctor is accused of sexually violating a minor who is said to be his wife's niece for over 20 months. He was arraigned by the Lagos State Government at the Sexual Offences and Domestic Violence Court in Ikeja area of Lagos. The doctor pleaded not guilty to the charge preferred against him. The court granted him bail of 50 million naira with 2 shorties and like sum. The court has fixed the 19th and 21st of December for continuation of trial. We close with the report that the Upper Sharia Court in Gusau has granted bail to Ikira Bilbis, the Zamfara Central Senatorial candidate of the People's Democratic Party. Part of the conditions for his bail is to produce 2 shorties, a servant permanent secretary in the State Civil Service, and a responsible person with a house worth 20 million naira in Gusau, Zamfara State. Ikira Bilbis was arrested on Tuesday by security operatives after being interrogated for several hours over alleged sponsorship of political thugs to vandalize campaign billboards, posters, and other items belonging to the APC during a welcome home rally in honor of Dauda Lawal, the embattled governorship candidate of the PDP.
And that's our program. Until next time, don't forget, you can catch this episode of the program and past episodes on our YouTube channel. I'm Millicent Walker. Thank you for watching.